Antimage and Isekai Litupk Adventure, Ends of Magic Book 1, audiobook by Kevin Chapter 28, a baited patrol the heirs clustered up, looking down into the pass. Nathan's gaze followed Sarah's rifle to the group of figures. The flaming dungeon was even more spectacular at night, and its light meant that the people below cast long shadows. They were moving across the pass below, staying as far away from the dungeon as they could get while remaining on flat ground. That meant they were about 200 feet directly downslope of the heirs, picking their way across the rocky base of the pass. The distant roar of flame meant Nathan couldn't hear any noise, and he couldn't see them as much more than silhouettes with long shadows. Sarah apparently could and reported on their enemies in a low voice. 10 golems, 5 slave elites, 5 mages, 2 war mages, an enslavement mage, an artisan mage, and a nail. They haven't seen us, or are doing a blasphemous job of ignoring us. Do we start this off with a bang? Stella looked excited, and her eyes shone with the flaring purple of plasma mana. Arl's frown was barely visible in the darkness, but he was clearly gauging the distance. Let's get closer, ambush them from above. Yeah, drop the mages from surprise and I'll free the elites. Nathan glanced towards Stella and raised an eyebrow. Let's bring back an old strategy. Throw me on top of the war mages. Sarah snipes the nail and Stella zaps the enslavement mage right before I drop in. Whoever finishes their target first gets the artisan. Arl and Kache on backup against the golems. Sounds good. This is a good chance to develop airwalking. Brock scoffed at the chatter. What of my own task? I could destroy that grouping in a breath if you asked. He gestured at the dungeon across the pass. Though I might ask a favor in return. Nathan traded a glance with Kache before responding to the quester. No need. We can fight this party ourselves. If it's a trap and Badad is hidden nearby, we'll need you in reserve. Or if we need saving because they've got tricks we can't handle. Brock sighed heavily. I won't be an unheard prophecy. Then he vanished, dust puffing up from his insane speed. Faint cries came from below before Brock's reappeared in another spray of dust. He tossed something to the ground with a thump. I mislike those who hide in the shadows. Everybody spent a moment processing what had just happened. Nathan looked down at the object on the ground and saw a pair of confused eyes staring back up at him. Brock's had just dropped ahead at their feet, still clad in the black hood of a nail. The hood and head were both severed cleanly, and blood flowed from the stump into the rocky ground with a faint gurgle. Nathan glanced down towards the Giants' Rest patrol. They were looking around in all directions, and a pulse of magic pinged out from them, highlighting the other heirs. Got 'em it. He sent a peeved look at Brox, who wore a smug expression. At least help us out if we get in trouble. The quester settled back in his seat, a spot out of sight of the pass below. You're impressive adventurers, you can handle this. You'll level more if I don't intervene. I'll get up if Badad decides to weigh in. I swear, he oscillates between being halfway decent and being completely intolerable. Nathan put thoughts of irresponsible questers out of his head as a yellowish flare lit up the landscape. One of the Giants' Rest mages had sent a globe of light high into the air, casting the surrounding terrain into sharp relief. A moment later, a spear of molten stone the size of a tree struck Kache's shield. The lava sprayed across the landscape, deflecting off a curve of golden light that extended from the wolfman's shield. Kache was pushed back a few steps by the impact, but he quickly reset himself to shield the camp from further direct attacks. Fireballs arced at them from above and from both sides, prompting Stella to throw out shields to intercept the explosive spells. Nathan's rage needed no prompting, kindling to life as he sprinted past the divine Justicar, with Arl close behind. The Giants' Rest patrol had fanned out on the landscape below, with the mages splitting up behind the slave elites. The 10 golems were sprinting upslope towards the heirs, and Nathan made straight for them. The lead statue leapt at him, bladed arms slicing through the air. Nathan jumped over the strike and slammed his palm into the golem's hip, shattering the magic of the core hidden in the joint. I need a really big jump to try and develop airwalking. Can Stella give me a toss, or is she too busy in the mage duel? He couldn't spare the attention to check, dancing through the next few strikes from the fast and agile golems. These models were more advanced than what he'd fought before, with metal armor and sharpened limbs. They moved with immaculate teamwork and uncanny precision, coming at him from multiple angles at once to box him in. Gotta be the artisan mage directing them. These must be war golems, smaller than I expected. The guardian golems in Tial's tower were enormous. High-tier dodging footwork 10 achieved. Congratulations, you have maxed out this utility skill. It cannot be improved any further. You must achieve insight into this skill to develop it to the next level. As it is high tier, the kind of insight will greatly affect how it develops. Their focus on Nathan cost the golems. Arl shattered one with 4 quick revolver bullets before blasting another one back with the lightning saber. Nathan tore the magic from the next one as his teammates switched to the giant greatsword with a disintegrating edge in a flash of motion. A purple-tinged fireball flew downslope, trailing mana to detonate against a triple-layered shield with a tremendous explosion, breaking the first layer. A split second later, a lightning bolt worthy of Zeus lanced down from the sky towards Kachai's shield. It never connected, instead curving to follow the path of Stella's plasma ball and punching through the second of the 3 shields. Show Stella, but it does seem she's busy. The next 2 golems lost their heads to pistol bullets from Sarah. Arl used his reach advantage to dice up the 2 that tried to delay him, while the final 3 jumped Nathan, seemingly desperate to pin him down. They were intentionally going high, trying to head Nathan in and prevent him from jumping. His magical senses told him why right before a cage of stone stabbed up from the ground. It would have surrounded him with thick bars of rock if he hadn't rolled down the slope, reaching out with his aura to stop the growth of 2 of the bars before they could block his way. The slope was steep and rocky, but Nathan came to his feet without issue. He was past the golems and left the remainder to his teammates. His goal was directly in front of him, and Nathan flew down the remaining distance like he was propelled by a jet engine. High-tier sprinting 8 achieved. The elite stood just behind the edge of the large shield that protected the mages. The green-robed woman maintaining the barrier looked strained, while a war mage continued to trade spells with Stella. He was volleying dozens of smaller fireballs now, trying to intercept her spells and overwhelm the air's defenses. The second war mage was charging up some kind of air spell that felt terrifying. There was enough power in the mana construct to blast away a castle wall. Nathan yelled at the man as hard as he could, flaring noticeability, and using his battle cry at the same time to draw attention. What emerged from his mouth wasn't so much a yell as a primal roar, reverberating in his chest and throat with a tearing sensation. I think I tore my vocal cords. They'll fix themselves. The war mage's head snapped down from Kachai's shield towards Nathan, and he unleashed the spell early with a panicked warble. Banishing Wind. The attack wasn't so much a wind spell as a solid block of gas molecules imbued with the magic to annihilate everything they touched. It was like a disintegration spell integrated into a cone-shaped blast of wind. The ground under Nathan's feet flashed into dust as his aura shielded him from the magic. The fast-moving wind should have carried him backwards, but with his momentum boosted by class skills, he punched through the blast of air. He kept calm as all of the matter not shielded by his aura dissolved, like the world was a dream coming to an end. Nathan smirked as the wind settled and thick dust billowed around him. He switched the effect of his noticeability in an instant to help him be stealthy. He crouched low to minimize his profile as he ran through the dust towards the Giant's Rest patrol. Mid-tier noticeability 8 achieved. The slave elites weren't ready for him when he broke through the remaining shield without slowing. They still attacked, but Nathan rolled past the first one and planted his hands to vault over the second, flipping up and past the elites. I can free them once the enslavement mage is dealt with. A steel ball slammed into the side of Nathan's head, cracking his skull. Instead of crushing the enslavement mage's skull like he'd meant to, he flopped atop her, woozy and reeling. Her mage armor did nothing to stop his bulk, and they went down in a tumble. Nathan felt an incredible disorientation, like he'd suddenly been thrown into a four-dimensional universe. The darkness of unconsciousness beckoned. He refused to let it claim him. His rage blazed bright, and Nathan's focus and battle meditation kept him present in the here and now. The world cleared in a moment as his brain healed up, the fragments of shattered bone audibly sliding back into position. Perfected body 8 achieved. There's an insight there in refusing to surrender consciousness. Nathan came to and found himself sprawled atop the enslavement mage. She feebly tried to push him off, but with him conscious, a wrestling match was only ever going to go one way. He rolled on top and crushed her throat with a punch before leaning out of the way of another whizzing ball of metal. He rolled away from the choking mage to avoid the slave elites, trying to get closer to the artisan mage. The man in the yellow robe was young, younger than Nathan, and wore an expression of nervous excitement as he sent another 3 metal orbs screaming through the air with twitches of his fingers. Nathan contorted his body, kicking one leg out to the side as he reached out with his anti-magic to nullify the projectiles. But the heavy balls were only barely magical. They bore heavy-duty enchantments that could be pulsed to reduce their mass for a brief moment. The mage seemed to be activating that enchantment and using force magic to easily redirect the projectiles. Magic is bullshit. Between this and controlling the golems, this guy's a damn prodigy. Time to put an end to that. The artisan mage kept the balls moving, zipping towards Nathan's head in pairs and trios. Nathan tried to disenchant each projectile, but the enchantment was robust, and they were only in range of Nathan's aura for less than a second apiece. At least the elites can't get close enough to stab me with these damn steel baseballs whizzing around. He leapt over another set of fast-moving orbs, spinning in midair. Then a spear thrown by an elite hit him below the right shoulder, the spearhead punching out of his chest. The magic on the weapon fizzled to nothing, and Nathan grabbed the blade, leveraging the force of his spin to snap the spear in half as the butt slammed to the ground. High-tier tumbling 8 achieved. As he landed, another one of the balls slammed onto his upper arm, splintering the bone and deflecting up into the air. More balls streaked for Nathan's head, but he leapt a dozen feet straight up, grabbing the wayward orb that had bounced off his arm. Another one crushed Nathan's tailbone, and a third tore off his shoe and took a toe with it. But Nathan ignored the injuries. He tightened his physical and immaterial fingers on the orb, tearing apart the enchantment set into the metal structure before hurling it back at the young man who'd sent it at him. The mage smirked and flicked a finger, blinking in surprise when the orb only deflected slightly, showing the first signs of panic as a lancing tendril of anti-magic bored a gap in his mage armor, ahead of the projectile. The baseball-sized steel object audibly broke bone as it slammed into the artisan's shoulder. The impact spun him around and threw the young man to the ground in a pile of yellow robes. The slave elites were ready for Nathan's descent, and he briefly wondered if he should try to develop airwalking right then and there. It's one of my 3 talents and will be a permanent one. I won't develop it in less than ideal conditions. Instead, he jerked himself sideways with his mobility skills, dodging another spear and the thrust of a greatsword to come down atop one of the elites. Nathan reached out with his aura and stripped away the mental magic before the man could bring his sword around. He rolled into the rest of the elites, shielding his head from further blows as he excised the magic from them all in the span of a few seconds. His head came up to see each of the fighters staggered and looking around with confusion as the mental magic broke. Turn, strike down your masters, join me as free men, Nathan bellowed in their faces, leveraging his leadership and sheer volume to penetrate the chaos of battle. Mid-tier battle cry 3 achieved. Then they were all bathed in flame. It was a consuming fire, hot as a blast forge, hot enough that Nathan felt the enchantments of the fighters around him fade as their weapons and armor melted to slag before they even hit the ground. His aura prevented the flames from reaching him, but the tiny fraction of the spell that became normal radiant heat left his clothes smoldering. Nathan let his rage slip free of battle meditation, feeling the excess speed and strength burn through his muscles in a counterpoint to the consuming flame all around. His eyes were blind in the midst of the inferno, but his magical senses could detect what was happening. One of the war mages was standing atop the downed enslavement mage, healing her while he blasted Nathan with a brutally powerful fire spell. From the flaring mana, it was harder than expected to heal the woman, but the mage kept the flame going. Nathan took powerful steps, forging upstream against the flow of magic. He burst from the shroud of flame to find the war mage wasn't even looking at him. He was helping the enslavement mage to her feet, blasphemously hard to heal. She was rubbing a hand over her neck in relief and was in the middle of speaking. Praise the giant. What a monster. Her eyes had a moment to widen as Nathan's aura slashed through a triple-layer mage armor before his elbow hit the war mage in the back of the head. Bone cracked and the man was hurled to the ground. Nathan's other arm lanced out a punch, caving in the enslavement mage's chest and throwing her back to the ground. Nathan turned to the last war mage, who had been matching Stella's spell for spell throughout the fight. The old red-robed man swore, "Doom upon you." Then he looked skyward and cast a spell. Fly Nathan leapt after him, throwing his aura out to break the spell, but the man accelerated upwards like a bat out of hell. He hurled a casual fireball backward that Nathan just as casually absorbed. I could have gotten him with airwalk, but that fight was just so fast. If Brox hadn't interrupted, I hate letting one of them get away. A lightning bolt the width of a school bus slammed into the fleeing mage. The light and noise split the dark sky and left Nathan blinking away after images as the sound echoed back from the mountains around them. But when the spell faded, the man was still there, looking faintly singed but still very much alive and intent on escaping. He spared one last look at Nathan, mouth sneering but eyes terrified. Sarah's rifle cracked and his head exploded. Drops of blood rained down over the landscape around Nathan as he moved towards the mages he'd struck thus far. He needed to ensure no one else would try to escape. The first war mage was very dead, the back of his skull caved in. The enslavement mage still lived, clutching at deflated lungs and attempting to cast a cure spell which fizzled against the magic-resistant wound. Nathan fixed that problem with a simple stomp. He turned towards the prone artisan mage to find that Arl was ahead of him. The young mage surged upright as metal-clad Boots approached, wincing as he used his wounded shoulder. He still managed to hurl 6 metal orbs and a spear of force at the master of many weapons. Arl's hands blurred faster than sight, and 4 of the orbs were struck from the air. He swayed aside from the other 2 and took the force spell to the chest. It broke on his woven metal armor like an icicle thrown against a wall. The young man held up his arms from where he lay on the ground. "Wait, I will." Arl's force saber sliced the mage in half from crown to groin. Implacable Antimage has leveled to 222. You and your peers have defeated a powerful Giant's Rest scouting party. Assassin of Gemor has leveled to 80. You have slain Naf Dho Enher and Verna Dha Wait. Damn, so close to level 81 on Assassin. That fight still got me 16 levels overall. If Brox hadn't interfered, then more of them would have been Assassin levels. I would have that level 81 development. Nathan looked around at the wreckage of the fight, grimacing at the slagged metal and charred remains of the slave elites. Even the one who'd been standing behind him hadn't been spared, the only benefit of being in Nathan's shadow, a more intact corpse. The light from the flare spell cast high above faded away, leaving the battlefield dark once more. The main light source was the reddish hues cast by the flickering flames of the dungeon, and by several guttering fires on the slopes of the mountain from the mage duel. Brox appeared next to Nathan in a gust of displaced air, clapping him on the shoulder. A worthy victory. The quester looked Nathan up and down, openly amused at his burnt clothing. You must pay your tailor in adamant if that happens in every fight. Nathan whirled at the quester, expression fierce. He brushed off the hand on his shoulder and almost swung a fist. His muscles strained, but battle meditation came back to the fore, and Nathan just barely managed to wrestle his rage back under control before he attacked Brox. The quester raised his eyebrows, looking surprised at Nathan's clear antipathy. We could have rescued those men. Nathan snarled, gesturing at the charcoal where 5 elites had once stood. They would have joined us and strengthened Halsmit for the coming fight. You got them killed, Brox shrugged, opening his mouth to respond with an amused smirk. The sight of the quester's mirth enraged Nathan further and he cut Brox off. But no, you wanted excitement. He tried to poke the target of his ire in the chest, but the quester deftly stepped back. 5 men who could have been our allies are dead for your amusement. The quester's expression grew surly. Then a battering ram hit Nathan in the face. He was airborne, his jaw was shattered and his neck was broken. He just punched me. I'll kill him. Nathan slammed into the ground, naked skin scraping against rock as he bounced and came to a rest. His eyes swam back into focus as his jaw mended and his rage redoubled, surging out of control. The quester stood over Nathan, looking down at him with a satisfied expression. I knew you could take that blow. I didn't want to strike you, but I don't desire to hear such words. He extended a hand to pull Nathan to his feet. As for the slaves, you weren't good enough to save them. Don't fart ice at me for that truth. You've got the blessings of Alida, and I would be your friend if you would only accept me. For prophecies hold if no other reason. Nathan fumed. He wanted to sweep Brox's legs from underneath him and return the blow, but his spine hadn't healed yet and he couldn't move. The brief respite gave him a moment to think, and for calm reason to smother blinding rage. We need him to fight Badad. He's got a temper, but so do I, even if I think he's an asshole and would really enjoy planting a fist in his nose. Throwing down now would be catastrophic. I don't need to win this dick-measuring contest. What's done is done. This is the sort of shit I was warned about. Battle Meditation 9 achieved. Nathan's body regained sensation and his arm came up. He took the quester's hand with a grimace, rolling his neck around and glaring. Fine. Not sure it deserved a punch. Once on his feet, he held a hand out in a wordless gesture to Arl. The heirs were standing nearby, postures alert and ready. Arl's hands were suspiciously close to the pouches that contained his weapons. But when he reached into the bag, he withdrew a bundle of clothes and tossed it to Nathan, just as the flickering illumination surged brighter around them. I really don't want to know what would happen if we attacked Brox, even if we won. A bunch of levels if we survived, but then no quester for the battle ahead. Brox had been about to reply to Nathan, but paused with his mouth half open at the flare of reddish light. He was looking past Nathan at the fortress of the face. His mouth split into a wide grin. It seems Algoa's blessing is upon us. Nathan glanced behind him, seeing thick tendrils of fire exiting the statue's mouth and feeding a growing firestorm above its forehead. Damn it, what now? Chapter 29. Flaming Faces. Stella slid down the slope, coming to a stop between Nathan and Brox with a furious expression on her face. She snarled at the quester, but then her eyes went to the massive conflagration growing in front of the fortress of the face. Dragon's breath, that's a lot of fire mana. It's coming straight towards us. The quester rolled his eyes before pointing towards the dungeon. A true and verified fire elemental, that's an exciting prophecy of death. Nathan looked up from the bundle of clothes he was holding to the flame racing across the bare ground. He estimated its speed and sighed. Then he tossed the clothes back to Arl. "We can't escape. If this thing is made of magic, I can probably take it. Stella's got outer shields, Kache on inner. Brox, you got anything?" The handsome man shrugged with an ambiguous grin. "I would hold that source of solace as a final measure." "Okay, please protect the heirs," Nathan said distractedly. "Let's see if I can handle this myself. Dealing with weird magic bullshit is kind of my thing." His rage intensified, filling his muscles with strength and boosting his anti-magic. Nathan was momentarily distracted by a faint shimmer in the air high above, but it faded into the swirling heat haze cast by the wall of flame bearing down on them. A moment later, he was sure it was just a figment of his imagination. Brox and the heirs clustered around Kache. The wolfman chanted under his breath, assembling a thick shield of divine mana that shone like a beacon in the night. Stella quickly threw up a 3-layered dome of blue magical force over the top. "I'd worry about that giving us away. But I'm pretty sure the giant self-aware firestorm is going to draw all eyes around. This thing is enormous. It's like fighting a natural disaster, and it would be damned stupid to die because we didn't take it seriously." The flame reached them a moment later, having crossed the width of the pass as fast as a speeding car. It grew from a distant blazing cloud to a hungry inferno that engulfed the entire area. Nathan's aura tightened around him protectively, absorbing the devouring magic of the elemental. "Sure glad this is magical fire." It would have been very awkward to end up as ash if an elemental somehow used non-magical fire. The body of the elemental wasn't simply fire, though. There was intent and purpose in the magic that blazed around Nathan, and it took affront at his continued survival. The magical heat intensified, then again as the stones underfoot cracked from the sudden temperature change. The stamina overload jitters started, and Nathan closed his eyes, taking deep breaths of hot air. He balanced between focus and rage while his magical senses probed the magic raging around him. It had intent like divine mana, but the structure was deep and complex, more like the magical computers he'd run across in the Crystalline Book and the Dungeon Control Center. The primary difference was that, while those structures had logic flowing through rigid and discrete channels, the elemental was a continuously shifting network of power. It didn't feel designed, but instead like something that had grown and evolved into intelligence and power. Magical Intuition 6 achieved. Nathan's aura spread out tentatively, absorbing more and more of the swirling inferno. He carefully gauged how far he could stretch his aura without letting the magical heat burn through his protections. The elemental didn't like the increased drain at all, and the fire suddenly retracted from Nathan, swirling around him in a tornado of ruby flame. A pressure mounted on Nathan's chest, and it didn't take long to figure out why. His breaths were drawing in scorching hot air that was devoid of any oxygen. Intentionally or not, the firestorm was suffocating him. He focused on the burn in his chest and used stamina to convert the carbon dioxide in his blood back to oxygen with perfected body. The process took a second to snap into place, but the pressure on his chest eased as his blood reoxygenated. It cost a lot of stamina, but Nathan was still way over his cap from the initial blast of magic. Now that his immediate concerns were addressed, Nathan considered his position in the eye of the storm. The raging flames spun around him at insane speeds, rippling with enough power to appear solid. But with his magical senses, he could sense what else the elemental was occupied with while it contained him. Just behind Nathan, the fire magic pressed greedily against Stella's shield. The intensity of the inferno around his friends was slowly increasing, but the shield held. It was clear that it couldn't hold forever. Their air won't last forever either. That wasn't the only thing the elemental was doing. Nathan could see it devour the lingering fire mana from the spells that had been cast in the recent battle. The elemental bore down on the area where the elites had been immolated and siphoned the remaining fire mana into itself, gaining a barely perceptible increase in definition. Nathan felt a more complex working at the edge of his perception and stretched his senses to get more detail. Given the density of magic, it was like trying to pick out details on a plane flying in front of the sun, but focus helped him sort through the sensory overload for the signal among the noise. Magical perception 8 achieved. Nathan walked towards where the Giant's Rest mages had died. His bare feet stuck slightly to the partially melted sand, and it took a constant stream of stamina to deal with the mundane heat from the ground below. The eye of the firestorm moved with him, though it tried to push him from his target, as if to subtly guide him away from the deceased mages. Now I'm definitely investigating. Nathan had grown used to sensing the mana pools of mages, and he'd noticed how their mana pools took a little while to diffuse after death. But he hadn't been able to figure out how to interact with them. The mana seemed to exist on a different layer of reality, one his anti-magic couldn't reach. He'd done some brainstorming on how to breach that barrier. Maybe he could punch a hole through it in order to temporarily or permanently drain a mage's mana pool. It was something he'd considered but never seriously attempted. This elemental knew the trick. A complex swirling vortex of magic surrounded each mage's corpse, even if ash and charred bone was all that remained. The magical firestorm had drilled through some kind of barrier and was siphoning away what remained of their mana pools. It was a slow process. Each mage had commanded a large amount of mana, though the war mages' resource pools were several times larger than their peers. The swirling mana refused to retreat, and the firestorm bore down on Nathan once more as he approached. The flames formed a wall of searing heat in front of him, snapping and popping with plasma. Nathan just tightened his aura down, walking through the elemental barrier and into the center of the grouped corpses. He didn't immediately disrupt the siphons, instead taking some time to understand exactly what was going on. Nathan spent focus to help him trace the mana flows with his magical senses. He closed his eyes once more, mapping out the complex constructs that slowly sucked out the otherwise inaccessible power. It was nothing like any of the codified spells he'd had so much practice disrupting. The mana siphon felt more organic, more a thorn than a needle, but he could understand the effect. Magical intuition 7 achieved. The elemental calmed down when Nathan didn't immediately interrupt its harvest. Even standing near the swirling vortexes of fire mana would have incinerated an unprotected person in seconds, but it had stopped funneling enough power to instantly kill a siege boar toward him. I almost wonder if we could be friends. It just wants its mana, but it's still trying to kill the heirs, probably for all the juicy mana Stella has. He reached out and shredded the siphon constructs. The vortices destabilized, and Nathan spread his aura wide to absorb the resulting surge of undirected mana. A furnace-crackling roar sounded across the pass, loud enough to burst eardrums. Didn't like that, did you? The firestorm above him went wild, bearing down on Nathan like a ravening beast. He focused his aura against it and boosted his anti-magic by leaning into the thrill of the contest. It was a rush to defy a calamitous power like this, and the life-and-death reality of the firestorm around him amplified his rage and made Nathan's lips peel back in a snarl. The saliva on his teeth evaporated. Nathan avoided taking a breath and stood still as the air around him flashed into plasma again. He was struck by waves of force and light, but all of the energy was magical. Only a tiny percentage of the flame around him was converted to true, non-magical heat, but it was still enough to burn Nathan's skin. He spent stamina to keep himself oxygenated, to heal himself, and even to cool himself down. It cost nearly 1,000 stamina every 5 seconds, enough energy to sprint for miles, gone in moments. But in the same interval, he absorbed that much mana and more. The incredible concentration of magic and light and pressure blinded Nathan's senses, and he used battle meditation to prevent panic from rising in the pandemonium. He was immersed in the sun, falling into an endless abyss of heat and fire. This is sustainable. I'm making more stamina than I'm spending. Eventually, this spell creature will burn itself out. It's spending thousands of mana a second against me. How much can it have? The one point of reference was Nathan's feet standing atop the burning rock. When that surface started to soften, Nathan extended his anti-magic down past his feet and into the rock to keep it from melting into lava. The flame pulled back slightly, no longer exerting itself so aggressively against Nathan and his anti-magic. The elemental hissed in the sky above, its frustration making the rock outside of his aura bubble. Glad I'm not breathing. The gas from that is pretty toxic. Nathan stood at the center of a blast furnace, but it was no longer the sun. While he'd been enmeshed, the siphons of mana had been re-established. The elemental seemed to care a lot about draining away the dead mage's mana. Nathan extended his anti-magic towards the siphons once more, and the mass of fire mana above him lowered threateningly, stopping right overhead. Is it offering a truce? Don't mess with me, I won't mess with you. Nathan turned his attention towards the airs. The fire had smashed through one of Stella's shields and hungrily licked at the second, causing it to crack and splinter. Inside was Kachai's shield, but Nathan wasn't comfortable with only a single layer protecting his friends. This inferno would kill them in seconds if they were unprotected. He frowned up at the intelligent firestorm, trying to figure out how to communicate with it, or at least let it know that his friends were off limits. He tried yelling, "Leave us all alone, and you can have the mana." The breath in afterwards burned his lungs with both heat and toxic gas that was quickly neutralized by his talent. There was no indication the elemental heard him, and the fire continued to assault Stella's shield. I'm worried it'll figure out it has leverage on me with Stella and my friends. If it wants to consume mana from dead mages, Stella's gotta smell like a king's feast with her enormous mana pool. Time to decide. Do I attempt to parley with a questionably intelligent elemental made of mana, or do I try to kill it? A firestorm that eats mana would be a powerful ally against Giant's Rest. So far most of its reasoning seemed pretty animalistic. The firestorm wanted mana, and it was trying to take it. He wasn't sure if it could even understand that Nathan wanted to trade safety for mana, but if it could, then it would understand it could pressure him by threatening the heirs. And every moment he wasted trying to communicate was another moment that the heirs' defenses grew weaker. Even if we can't communicate, we might be able to lure it towards the Giant's Rest army, especially if they come up this pass. But Gemor has been dealing with dungeons for hundreds of years. They taught me that anything coming from a dungeon cannot be controlled, will try to kill me, and will attempt to destroy any civilization it finds. I've seen nothing to contradict that, and I don't think I'm smarter than hundreds of years of adventurers. Maybe if I had some special communication talent, but I don't. And I'm on a timeline. With that thought in mind, Nathan scythed his aura through the siphons, once more shattering the swirling magical effects. As the full fury of the storm descended once more, he leapt for the largest remaining mana pool, which had belonged to the war mage Sarah had shot out of the sky. He crouched over the physical location of the immaterial resource, denying the mana creature access. Then he spun his anti-magic in a spiral, trying to recreate the feel of the spell the elemental used to pierce through whatever barrier blocked off the power. He focused on the same exact spot the elemental's drill had been, hoping to take advantage of the work it had already done. I need to deny it a reason to stay here, then make it too expensive to stick around. Hopefully it leaves if there's no more easy mana to claim. If not, I can try to kill it by draining all of the mana. But it's so huge, I'm barely scratching the bulk of this thing. Nathan could tell the moment when the elemental realized what he was doing. Another roar sounded across the night, this time tinged with desperation. He blocked out his burns from the superheated environment and the sensation of furious mana surging around him. Focusing entirely on the slowly dissipating mana pool he stood right on top of. His anti-magic bored fruitlessly at the immaterial mana pool for a second before gaining traction. The new source of stamina flooded into Nathan as he broke through the barrier. He rushed to siphon out every bit of the mana. It was like sucking down an entire cup of tea through a straw. His aura was naturally tuned to absorb mana, and it only took seconds for him to drain the dead war mage's mana pool dry. Aura of Anti-Magic 7 achieved. The elemental flailed at him desperately, and Nathan became aware his entire body was covered in second-degree burns, plus toxins from the burns as well as the toxic gas around him were spreading through his blood. It had taken a while, but the ridiculous amount of magical fire had finally succeeded in heating the air enough that Nathan was burning from purely mundane heat transfer. His healing was keeping up for now, but it was costing a bucket load of stamina to do it. The problem was that the rate of damage was just going to keep ratcheting up as the air grew hotter. He was fighting a losing race. I need to convince it to flee, or I'll need to run away myself and hope Brox pulls a Deus Ex Machina. Let's get rid of the rest of these stray mana pools and see if that does the trick. They'll give me the stamina to keep going for longer. He hopped over the ring of lava that marked the elemental's rage, running towards the spot where he'd killed the first war mage and the enslavement mage. He broke the elemental's siphons, quickly establishing his own. At this point, it was a race between Nathan's ability to drain the mana pools of the dead mages and the elemental killing him, with the tiny percentage of its power that translated to radiant heat. Next was the artisan mage, who'd had the least mana. The elemental's drain was inefficient enough that more than half of his mana pool remained. Nathan was getting faster at the process, barely breaking stride to claw out the resource before sprinting towards the spot where the last mage, the Nail, had fallen. Brox had killed the Nail 100 feet away from where the rest of the Giant's Rest party had fallen, and Nathan covered the space at a dead sprint, desperate to deny the elemental its meal so it would leave the rest of them the hell alone. The distance brought him away from the concentrated heart of the elemental, and the environment cooled slightly. With that done, he turned back to the heirs. They were the only remaining source of mana left. Nathan had absorbed all of the mana left behind by the dead mages, while the elemental had devoured every scrap of environmental mana as well as any enchantments left on the battlefield. The firestorm twisted up and away from Nathan, and he was buffeted by the winds blown up by its passage. The ground around him glowed faintly with heat, as the elemental concentrated itself into a towering tornado of flame directly above the heirs. Uh-oh. The pillar of fire crashed down onto Stella's third and final layer of shield, shattering it and impacting Kachai's dome of golden light. The two self-animated magics battled against each other as the fire elemental tried to crush the shell of divine magic to reach the juicy targets barely visible within. Nathan arrived on the scene, happy to stand on the relatively cool stone that had been protected by Stella's shield until a moment ago. He spread his aura out as far as he dared, cutting away at the fire elemental as it battered against Kachai's shield. The elemental drew back from him once more, darting back a few times to try and get at Nathan's friends. He wielded his aura like a gigantic sword, the extra rank-ups to his anti-magic talent giving him extra volume to work with as he cut at the probing tendrils of animated fire. Kachai's divine protection remained resolute, replenishing itself slightly in the respite. There was a moment of stillness as the towering firestorm seemed to sit back and take measure of the battlefield. "Come on. Go home. Nothing for you here, just me, eager to take bites out of your essence." The attitude of the mana shifted in front of Nathan's eyes. It went from an all-consuming inferno to a spitefully hissing blaze. Then it skittered back across the pass to the fortress that was its home. The massive firestorm looked like a predator returning from a hunt, mildly wounded but satisfied. Implacable Antimage has leveled to 227. You have survived confronting a fire elemental. Nathan just stood there for a moment, watching it go. He opened his mouth and sucked in his first breath in several minutes. The air was still scalding and dusty, but at least it contained oxygen. He coughed a few times, then spat up some black phlegm as the dome beside him shimmered and retracted into Kachai's metal shield, which was braced on the ground. The piece of metal glowed with heat, and Kachai's teeth were gritted as smoke rose from burning fur. He cast the shield to the ground before golden light played over his arm, healing the injury. Brox smiled, looking at the partially molten landscape. Now that was a blaze worthy of Quenfi. Arl and Sarah heaved identical sighs of relief. Then they started coiling up a wide hoop of metal they'd been trying to lay out. It was the enormous dimensional container they'd gotten from the nest of ashblood cobras, the one that the matriarch had used as a spawning pool. It had been the reservoir for an entire Sklian town, and contained an entire lake's worth of water. Contaminated water now, and probably full of a whole bunch of young ashblood cobras. We have no idea if those are still alive, or how long it'll take them to starve. Still, opening that portal and jumping through would have been a better alternative than getting burned alive by a giant fire elemental. Stella was on one knee, taking gasping breaths, clearly overwhelmed by the effort it had taken to hold off the fire elemental for several minutes. She looked up, watching as the living firestorm finished retreating through the orifices of the Fortress of the Face. She coughed in the hot and dusty air before summoning up a wide gust of wind to sweep it away. That was a prophecy of death. What a trial and what incredible insights of fire. The mage's grin was a little manic as her eyes shone with an inner flame that shifted slightly to match the red color of the elemental. "Thanks for the wind." Nathan sighed, spreading out his arms to catch as much of the breeze as he could. It was definitely nice to not stand around in oven temperatures anymore. He was still overheated, but his inherent toughness, rage, and healing were keeping him functional as he cooled off. His voice was cracked. "Can I get some water? I'm a little hot," Brox chuckled. "I'll raise my sword to that." He whipped out some kind of nozzle from a dimensional pouch and aimed it in Nathan's direction before twisting a lever. A spray of cold water hit Nathan straight on with as much pressure as a hose. He sighed with relief at the temperature, even as the water steamed and sizzled off the rock around them. "Thanks." The quester kept the stream of water going as he laughed. "I've fought elementals before, but only with teams of legend and artifacts of collies. By Ada's, I've never seen somebody run into one naked as a newborn and come out the other side." He cut off the stream of water and walked up to clap Nathan on the shoulder. "I'll tell that story to this ending and beyond." His eyes danced with amusement, and it seemed Nathan had been forgiven. Then Brox gestured with his chin toward the dungeon. "So, you've seen down the dragon's gullet. Time to conquer this dungeon." Nathan took a step away from the quester and ensured he wasn't under the effect of Brox's social skills before he considered the suggestion. "I know what the danger is, and I have the tools to fight it. Absorbing all of the mana might be easier in an enclosed space like the dungeon, but the mundane heat in there is probably incredible. I don't know if I could deal with that long enough to kill it, or what it would do in desperation. What if there are multiple elementals and I chase them out and they go attack Housemate?" Nathan rubbed his hand through his rapidly regrowing hair. "Maybe, but it would be a risk, one I've got no reason to take. As it is, the dungeon's a barrier between Housemint and Giant's Rest. If the army comes this way, we just wake the elemental again. We may have awoken the dungeon for good. Kochai said, his voice grave. This must be reported, and we must watch it to see if the elemental is aggressive and decides to roam. If it does, then we may not have a choice. Brox gestured to the wolfman as if his point was proven. So, do we await an invitation from the divine, or do we take this course ourselves? From one fight directly into the next. Sarah's voice was derisive as she surveyed the plain. It's late. Let us rest tonight, surveil the dungeon. Tomorrow we'll decide what to do. The quester frowned. Fine, you've triumphed over two mighty foes. Might as well sleep before killing an ancient being of magic. Chapter 30. Faces in the dark. Nathan looked at the blackened and partially melted landscape around them. The ground protected by Stella's shield had been only lightly roasted, and the area within Kochai's shield was pristine. It looked like a huge two-layer bull's melted into the floor of the mountain pass. He pursed his lips. Do we want to stay here? It seems a little obvious if there's a follow-up group. Sarah pointed up the slope at their campsite. We'd watch from there. We can shape our eyes for any who come to gawk at this. She swept her hand around them generally, indicating the devastation left behind by the fire elemental. Nathan had to acknowledge her point. Their campsite had a good view of the site of the battle, but it wasn't obvious. Anybody coming by would have reason to be cautious, but the nature of the destruction would probably indicate that the threat was the dungeon rather than anything else. The team started back up the slope. After a dozen steps, Brox yawned and stretched. He vanished with a gust of wind that stirred up the smoky dust floating in the air, reappearing on the ledge that held their campsite. He gave a jaunty wave before disappearing from sight over the crest of the slope. Kochai didn't let the moment go to waste, glancing over at Stella. What occurs, Stella? What do you think of Brox and his plans? The mage returned his questioning look with a wry and tired smile. He's a bit of a muck-grabber's asshole, isn't he? Everybody gave her a surprised look, and she huffed out a tired sigh as she responded to the wolfman. Hear me, but your blessing helped when Brox told me to drop my shield and contest the fire elemental with my own power. He did what? She plodded up the slope, not in any hurry to get anywhere. I was so focused on the shield, using my concentration skill. When he commanded me so directly, I just ignored him. The blessing made me certain it was right to keep the shield up, and I didn't let him distract me. Stella stopped, looking back at the lighter patch on the stone where they'd made their stand against the elemental. And then, high-tier concentration developed into unshakable focus. It says I won't be distracted from my goals by mental skills or spells. She shook her head tiredly. It's not a skill of adamant, but I'm free of regret to finally have some innate mental protection. That's a blasphemous development, Arl said, punching Stella in the arm and smiling widely. The mage smirked a little bit, rubbing her arm. Yeah, she leaned her head back, looking up at the glowing world above for a moment. Yeah, protection from mental skills and spells. I'm really glad. Her eyes closed, and Nathan was worried he'd have to catch her before she tumbled down the slope. But she wasn't passing out. Stella was crying softly, tears slowly leaking from her closed eyes as she stood there. The air stopped, moving to stand protectively around her as she quietly sobbed with relief. Sarah reached out and gently gripped Stella's hand. Hear me, I'm glad you're protected now. We're with you till endings. Kochai placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Your experience has made you stronger, forged you harder. We leave our challenges behind, improving in their passage. It is the blessing of Davrar. The words were imbued with a faint tinge of divine mana, and Stella's stance firmed up. She didn't stop crying, but her posture grew resolute, more confident. She raised her hands to the sky and balled them into fists. Never again. Nathan let the rest of the heirs go to bed and took first watch. After all, he was still hopped up on stamina. He'd gotten quite practiced at going way over his maximum cap for the resource, but it left him jittery and hyper until the excess went away. Also, there was something bugging him. A faint thought twigged at the back of his mind, like something important he'd forgotten that just barely escaped his mental grip. He took a seat at the edge of the ledge that their camp sat on, watching over the valley even as most of his focus turned inwards. Maybe I'll figure out what's bugging me if I stop focusing on it for a bit. I can keep watch and use the extra stamina to keep improving my body. Can't do that if I go to sleep and let all this excess power bleed away. He'd hit the point of diminishing returns on using perfected body for long-term gains. It had been easy at the start to align muscle fibers, streamline neural myelination, and optimize bone honeycombing. But now, he'd picked all the low-hanging fruit, and further improvements were becoming more and more difficult to come by. Nathan had started to experiment with esoteric material to flat-out improve the properties of the various tissues of his body. The novelty made it a slow and stamina-expensive process, but the only way to make improvements was to experiment. He'd recently succeeded in making his tendons dramatically stronger by weaving elastin and collagen polymers together with some layered beta-sheet proteins inspired by spider silk. So far, everything seemed to still be working, and Nathan had decided he wanted to apply the same improvement to his skin. His implacable anti-mage class made him extremely tough, especially when raging, but he still tended to get cut open by magic weapons, and hoped that increasing the tier strength of his skin would make that happen a little less frequently. After that is bone hardening. I'm willing to sacrifice bone marrow in my spine and risks to avoid losing my head or hands. It took time and a lot of stamina to figure out how to make his skin harder to cut without giving it the same texture as rhinoceros hide. He focused on experimenting around the base of his neck, looking for something tough that wouldn't inhibit flexing the skin. He'd chosen the neck because of a desire to keep his head connected to his body. It seemed like an important priority. But the process itched like hell, and there wasn't much to occupy him aside from paying attention to make sure nobody snuck up on them. That also seemed like a pretty important thing to be doing, for some reason. While his skin shifted on a molecular level, Nathan kept watch over the dark pass below and the sky above. The view was spectacular, with the baleful glow of the Fortress of the Face casting the nearby landscape in orange tones and long shadows. But the real glory was above. With only thin cloud cover, the continents and oceans spread out over Nathan's head like a tapestry of earth split open and sewn end to end. The blue-green majesty was only marred by occasional splotches of black or white blight. Nathan kept his eyes on the sky, idly estimating how many Earth-equivalent surface areas he could see from here. I'm making some pretty big assumptions here with how big those continents are, but all I'm looking for is an order of magnitude estimate. Maybe 100, 200. He ruminated about Davrar for a little while, picking at a problem he hadn't considered for a while. The sun of Davrar is artificial, or at least magical. It's also pretty close to the surface in terms of astronomical units. It seems to get recharged or something during the solstice. So my intuitions about solar systems don't necessarily apply. But Davrar isn't the size of a solar system, not nearly as big, but bigger than a planet. Nathan remembered his real task and dropped his eyes to the ground to keep his bases covered. The landscape was just as desolate as it had been a few minutes before, so he looked back up at the sky and thought about what it meant. I don't have enough clues to figure out Davrar. The one person who could tell me more punched me in the face recently. I need to try and catch him in a good mood to ask him more questions. The jittery feeling faded as Nathan's excess stamina drained into the skin of his neck. He sighed in relief as the itching faded. Nathan's thoughts turned to Brox and the way the Quester had acted the last few days. He just doesn't seem to fully consider the ramifications of his actions, or maybe feels so insulated from any consequences that he doesn't care. He certainly doesn't take responsibility when he does something impulsive that endangers us. But if he doesn't care, why is he here? Nathan's mouth twisted in a grimace. After talking to Kia, Nathan felt like he had a better grasp on his own moral compass. He had committed to always consider his actions and to keep thinking about if the ends justified the means. He didn't want to fall into the habit of killing as the easy answer to his problems. Not if there was a better way. His gaze panned over the blasted terrain where they'd fought the Giants' Rest mages. The soft blue and green light from above mellowed the scene, made the scorched and melted landscape look calm and peaceful. He didn't see anything of note, so he looked back up again as he ruminated on the recent fight. I don't feel the least bit bad about that fight. Those mages were soldiers. They signed up for this fight the moment they left their homes to attack Houseman. Even that kid with the metal orbs. He was a prodigy with his magic, but he was here to enforce slavery on innocents, and so I killed him, and I'd do it again. Killing a mage on the battlefield, where their intent to harm was implicit, was fundamentally different than killing them in their bed. But Nathan was actively planning on going to Giants' Rest with Phelan to try and destroy Giants' Rest from the inside. That would probably involve killing a lot more mages in their beds. Do I have a choice? If I had to kill every mage in Giants' Rest to break their culture of slavery, would I do it? I definitely prefer another way. The archmages have to go. But the enchanters, the students, that's a lot of unnecessary death. It was a problem he would have to keep wrestling with. The real issue was that he didn't know enough. What would it take to topple Giants' Rest? Would he have to start at the top and kill his way down until they agreed to stop being slaving assholes? If I kill all of the mages, then a lot of the freed slaves will die to the dangers of Davrar. I'd love to wave a magic wand and make everybody in Giants' Rest have basic empathy for their slaves and work to fix their shit. But that's not about to happen, even if I hadn't given up magic. The best I can do is ensure that the people I kill deserve it, or at least murder the fewest number of relatively innocent people in their beds on my way to my greater good. With a sigh, Nathan remembered the artisan mage he'd killed in Houseman, the one who'd had a lovingly made quilt on her bed. He'd have preferred she survived to flee Houseman, and then survive the fall of Giants' Rest to contribute to whatever came after. Brox just doesn't take the energy to think like that. He just does what he wants. If there was an enemy in front of him, he'd kill them. Granted, that's what I've done so far, so I can't truly claim the moral high ground. But I'd like to try and do better. That thought made Nathan even more frustrated with the quester and his avowed desire to delve the dungeon tomorrow. It was a stupid and unnecessary risk, and put Nathan squarely in the crosshairs of a magical being that was best measured in terajoules. Hard problems don't have simple solutions, and that means you need to get involved and work instead of taking the easy solution, which is usually no solution at all. Nathan's eyes traced the coastline of one of the continents above before his eyes seemed to jump towards a faint shimmer in the air. Nathan dismissed it as a cloud in the sky, casting another quick glance around to be sure nobody was sneaking up on them. He frowned as something weird pinged his magical perception, feeling a bit like some approaching spells and a fairly sizable mana pool. Just gotta be some weird mana floating around after the fire elemental. Nathan shook his head to try and clear it, the thought that had been bothering him surging him with worry. He was nervous as hell and started breathing hard. What's going on? Why am I suddenly hyperventilating? Everything's peaceful and calm. Nothing's happening, there's nothing to be worried about. Regardless of whatever wasn't happening at the moment, Nathan didn't want to lose his train of thought. He managed to refocus on his musings. I don't want to get drawn into Phelan's narrative again. In Houseman, she pretty much pointed me at people, and I killed them. I need to double-check who she points me at and not blindly trust her. Hopefully, Mental Fortress will help me with that if she is using a skill on me. Nathan got up and started pacing, unable to keep still as a sick anxiety built inside of him. He had a sudden urge to duck and surrendered to it, dropping into a crouch in an instant as something whooshed overhead. Wind is pretty loud tonight. That thought felt wrong, and a realization in the back of his head crystallized. Mental Fortress pulled up definitive memories for Nathan's attention. The shimmer he'd seen now and earlier matched how he saw invisibility spells. The magical signature indicated a flying mage. The whoosh had been an invisible attack aimed at his head. Nawa, that can't be it. No reason for a mage to be here. Nathan fought through the mental influence and started spending focus to reassure himself that there was an enemy mage around. He looked up and saw the shimmer coming back around for another pass. His magical senses let him find the mana pool and associated spells. But he couldn't localize the target, his mind seeming to slip when he pinned them down. His eyes kept sliding away from the haze in the air. That's a goddamn strong stealth skill, combined with powerful magic. They're being edited out of my conscious mind in some strange way, but my subconscious knows. Trust it. Nathan leapt upwards from his crouch, his right fist leading the way. He wasn't aiming so much as letting his body's natural inclination do the aiming for him. His aura sliced through a series of spells before his fist rammed into flesh. Somebody gave a pained gasp. Congratulations, you have developed the high-tier Notice, utility skill into alertness. Beware, it is harder to rank and develop non-tiered utility skills. Utility skill. Alertness. This skill will help you consciously and unconsciously notice important details, and you will be very difficult to deceive with stealth skills or magic. Especially useful for rapidly detecting concealed enemies, magical effects and triggers. Nathan didn't put his full body weight behind the blow, instead grabbing hold of the barely tangible object and swinging it underneath him. He used slow fall to accelerate downwards, crashing into the hard ground knees first. His impact was cushioned by something, though it gave with a crunch that made him wince. Nathan stared down in confusion for a moment as something clattered to the ground nearby. A complex piece of spellwork bloomed underneath him. It felt like a healing spell cast from a contingency item. But Nathan was so close that his aura immediately canceled the effect before it could heal whoever the target was. He blinked around for a moment, confused as to why he was resting on empty air. Then his eyes seemed to clear, like he was recovering from being flash-blinded. Nathan was kneeling atop a spindly old figure in plain black robes. Is that Badud? Implacable Antimage has leveled to 237. You have killed the Archmage of the Nails. Assassin of Gemor has leveled to 81. You have slain the Master Assassin Kala Dha Drex as she ambushed you from hiding. Please choose a developed class from the following list to continue leveling, as you have unlocked a higher level than 81. I guess not. I'll take the Archmage of the Nails. Potential classes. Mage Killer. You have slain dozens of mages in the face of their most powerful magics. This class will enhance your anti-magic to subvert enemy spells and help you remain hidden from mages, while also ensuring you finish off difficult-to-kill enemies. This class may further develop into classes focused on stealing enemy magic or engaging successfully in direct combat against mages. With this class, you will be able to combat the most powerful magic wielders. Master Assassin of Gemor. You have been personally trained by the leader of the Assassins of Gemor. This class will allow you to blend into nearly any situation and make you more persuasive. Additional skills will enhance your self-modification abilities, allowing you to quickly and reliably change your face. This class may further develop into classes focused on changing shape, gaining your enemy's trust, or killing completely unseen. With this class, you will be the perfect invisible killer. Nathan stood, wiping the splash of gore off his legs and frowning at his class options. Only 2 options. Boo. I suppose it really hasn't been a long time since I hit 27. I wasn't able to pick up a lot of insights or do deeds that might give me additional classes. Maybe if I'd actually figured out a good time to develop Airwalk and used it, I would have gotten a class that could synergize with that. My first thought is that Master Assassin of Gemor is a nice class for sneaking into Giant's Rest after the battle, but Magekiller might be better for winning that battle. There was a flurry of motion from behind Nathan, and he looked backwards to see Sarah, Arl, and Kachai quickly readying themselves to fight. Nathan took a second to look around the campsite to ensure there weren't any other infiltrators around. I caught the literal boss of the enemy spy organization and developed my perception skill. I'm pretty sure nobody else from Giant's Rest is capable of sneaking up on me anymore. What was that? Arl said from his bedroll where he'd rolled to his feet and was scanning the area with his shotgun ready. Nathan, are you standing on somebody? Sarah asked from the perch she'd leapt to, higher up the slope. She was staring at the black-robed figure on the ground. Koch and Arl hadn't noticed yet. He looked back at his teammates, then down at the corpse. Nathan smirked and stepped off the bundle of cloth and flesh. Yeah. This was an archmage of Giant's Rest, Kala Dha Drex, the leader of the Nails. I don't think there are any more nearby. A moment of silence greeted his words. The wind howled in counterpoint before anybody spoke. That's a blasphemous kill, Kache said, striding forward without his armor. The big wolfman carried his shield and hammer, blinking sleep out of his eyes as he approached Nathan and the corpse. Stop, Nathan said, holding out his hand towards his friend. He pointed at the ground just in front of Kachai's foot. There's an invisible weapon right there. She dropped it when I grabbed her. Arl stepped forward like a dog expecting a treat. Oh, I'd love an invisible weapon. He looked around, a wide grin on his face. Where is it? Nathan just rolled his eyes, keeping his hand pointed at the weapon and waving off Arl to wait as he looked for the other 2 members of their group. Stella was still fast asleep, and Nathan stepped over to make sure she hadn't gotten her throat cut while he wasn't watching. Brox's magical tent was sealed, and he didn't seem to be in a hurry to emerge. Nathan shrugged and walked back to the corpse of the Archmage, gesturing over Sarah and Kachai. Then he swept the body with his senses, finding a half-dozen bombs and a few dimensional bags that definitely felt like they'd eat anybody who opened them without the right magical signature. He reversed the gesture, halting his friends. I think the Nails are almost as paranoid as old Gemor. There are a lot of traps on her. The sword first, Arl demanded, dancing around the spot where the weapon lay. It's not a sword, an axe, I think. Nathan walked to the place he could feel the object, lowering his hand to hover over the perfectly translucent weapon. This isn't Giant's Rest work, though the traps in it are. They're magically bolted atop this masterpiece of a weapon. It's like welding a bayonet onto a plasma rifle. He looked up at Arl. Want to keep the invisibility? The master of many weapons nodded vigorously. With a judicious application of anti-magic, Nathan carefully burned away the Giant's Rest traps, restoring the clean and lethal feeling of the metal and wood beneath. He got up. I'm pretty sure it's Quasian work. Beyond being invisible and having excellent strengthening and sharpness enchantments, there's also some kind of death magic going on. It feels like it will cast a powerful necromancy spell on anybody it cuts. There's a mental component too, but it doesn't seem invasive. I think it's like the armor, so that the wielder always knows where the weapon is. It might also control the death magic. Nathan picked up a pinch of dirt and sprinkled it on the shaft of the axe. The handle is here. Arl reached over and punched Nathan in the shoulder. You might not give me grand insights, but these weapons are worth a dragon's hoard. He reached down and grabbed the haft of the axe, lifting the arm-length weapon up in one hand. The wiry man grunted slightly, eyebrows drawing down as he concentrated. Yeah, I know exactly where the blade is. Then his eyes widened. And I can control the necromancy spell. This axe can kill anything living 2 different ways, then raise them as undead under my command. He gave it an experimental swing. Self-charging too, a weapon fit for a quester. Nathan stepped over to the Archmage's corpse to start disabling all of the dangerous traps she'd been carrying on her person. Why was the Archmage of the Nails out here anyway? Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com. Chapter 31. Breaking Faith. Sarah rubbed at her forehead, examining the body of the Archmage. Hear me, I think she was backup for the other team, or at least supposed to be the true attack to their feint. She grinned, teeth flashing in the darkness. Well, we smothered that fire. Why didn't she participate in the fight before? Katja asked, frowning and scratching at his chin. That's right. I did spot her right before the fire elemental attacked, but her mental mojo convinced me I didn't. Sarah shot a look at her brother, who was still swinging his new axe around. I would bet Dragon Bones to Stalker Teeth she was surprised by Brox's speed, and he killed the nail, the only one she probably cared about. After that, she watched Nathan fight and chose to strike with surprise. Nathan grunted in agreement as he went through the Archmage's pockets, disarming what traps he could and setting the rest aside. She's definitely paranoid as hell. Who keeps explosives in their sleeves? Sarah chuckled and raised her hand before pointing down the slope at the charred landscape below. Then the elemental attacked. She must have retreated rather than draw its attention. After that, she decided it would be best to attack when only one person was awake. The copper-skinned woman shrugged, her black ponytail bouncing vaguely behind her head in the darkness. That's my best shot. I'm glad Nathan was on watch. Arl joined them, a faint sheen of sweat on his skin. So am I. What a weapon. It's perfectly weighted to throw. His arm snapped forward with a faint whistling sound before a large rock upslope of them split in half with a flash of black light. The cut edge of the stone appeared faintly melted. I'm still connected to it for a few seconds after it leaves my hands, so I know exactly where it lands, Arl explained, walking over to the rock and picking up the invisible weapon from the far side of the bisected boulder before stowing it in one of his dimensional pouches. His sister's voice was sarcastic. Just don't cut yourself on it. Necromancy of Quaz would be worse than the poison Dad used to train us not to grab things by the sharp end. Arl chuckled. Yeah, that just gave us the shits. He shook his head in exasperation. Where do you even get a weapon poison that gives somebody shits? Nathan blinked down at a note card he just disarmed. It had been enchanted to explode with a force equal to a large fireball when somebody flipped it open. The outside said details within in an even hand. Inside was just a note that said details. Huh, definitely a spy and her bag of tricks. Nathan was separating out the belongings into 3 piles, and he noticed the heirs growing increasingly interested as each pile grew. Somebody wake up Stella, she want to see all of this. Koch had cleared his throat and walked over to Stella, shaking the mage gently and beckoning her to join them. Huh, Wazat, she said, rubbing her eyes and looking blearily down at the 3 piles of stuff alongside the corpse. Archmage, Nathan said with a smirk. Tried to kill me while I was on watch. Didn't go well for her. He gestured at the 3 piles. Loot. The first pile is probably safe. The second pile is maybe safe. The third pile is definitely not safe. All of the dimensional bags were in the 3rd pile, which was the largest by far. It also held all of the magical grenades, which felt distinctly unstable to Nathan, like they'd been designed to go off with minimal handling. Stella just blinked at him for a second. Huh. Then she squinted at the piles. Yeah, amazing. It won't melt into the air, so can I go back to sleep? Koch raised one expressive eyebrow. And forfeit this hoard to Brox. You are also needed to dispose of the body. I would not invite the elemental out of the dungeon once again. Stella shot a look over to Brox's tent, waking up a bit more. There hadn't been any activity from the quester since he'd entered his camouflaged shelter. Right, yes, dragon's breath, let's do this. Over the next 15 minutes, Nathan stripped the Archmage of all her valuables before Katja and Stella took her body a short distance away and buried it deep underground with earth mana. Good way to deny the body as a focus for scrying magic. Nathan spoke up as they returned, pitching his voice so all of the heirs could hear. My second class hit 81. Sarah paused in scanning down the pass with her rifle to give him a disbelieving look. You gained that class this week. Nathan shrugged in response, snapping a knife whose handle would turn into a poisoned blade if it was ever drawn from its sheath. He looked up to meet Kachai's eyes as they weighed on him. Killed a lot of mages since then, including an archmage. If it's any consolation, I think it slowed down the levels on implacable anti-mage. Though more because of how I've been fighting than any kind of experience splitting. I wouldn't have been doing much assassinating without the class. Nathan sorted through a few more items, tossing the real weapons aside to be curse-broken later, while he destroyed those whose only purpose was to punish the unwary. I wonder if she just really wanted to be sure she got whoever killed her, or if she was in the habit of handing trapped items out to people. Maybe as training. I could see her giving things to people and them being very unsure if it was useful but trapped, or entirely just a trap. Arl continued the conversation with a humorous lilt to his voice. Pardon my axe, but will you tell us your choices? Confused by his friend's tone, Nathan glanced up once more to see Arl waving his invisible axe around, a shit-eating grin on his face as he handled the invisible weapon. Yeah, sure. Nathan chuckled, shaking his head at his friend's antics. Only 2 choices, which makes sense since it's only been a few days since I hit 27. Mage Killer helps me fight and kill mages. Says it'll let me fight the most powerful magic wielders. The other one is Master Assassin of Gemor, more stealth, and it will let me change my appearance. He grimaced. It'll also give me a persuasion skill. The heirs looked around at each other with grim faces. Stella's lips thinned as she pressed them together, holding in her reaction. Yeah, she'd hate that. With good reason, what with Tial's mind control and Brox's social skills being so recent. Arl let loose a deep sigh, scrubbing a hand through his hair. Well, that's a prophecy of smoke and blood, isn't it? He waved his hand as if abdicating responsibility. Do as your flame calls. Remember my mother's words. Kachai's voice was deep, his gaze intent as embers of light woke in his eyes. Be sure your path leads to a place you wish to go. Think of what each class means to you. Sarah just shrugged. Give my words the weight you will, but you're going to Giant's Rest on your own after the battle. Seems like Master Assassin of Gemor is closer to the target for that, but for the battle itself, Mage Killer to strike the foe. Nathan shot a look at Stella, but she just shook her head, refusing to say anything. They don't seem to want to give advice on this class choice as much. I think it's more emblematic of the path they won't follow me down. If I take Master Assassin of Gemor, then I'm really diverging. Maybe too far to easily rejoin them after Giant's Rest. He blew out a breath, surveying all of the items he still had to go over. I'll think about it and tell you what I choose. For now, let's go through all of this stuff. They went back to sorting through the loot, finding a hilarious number of weapons disguised as common objects. There was a set of fancy self-filling pens containing several colors of ink, which doubled as paralytic or lethal poisons. A makeup kit contained a hand mirror that cast a strong sleep spell on whoever looked into it, while the brush would blind anybody who wasn't the registered user. Going through the possessions of such a paranoid person served to change the subject effectively. Soon enough, Nathan and Stella were chuckling over the more bizarre items while Sarah kept watch. Katja returned to bed, and Arl stored the more mundane items Stella didn't want cluttering up her own dimensional bags, like the piles of money. And to be fair, Stella's got so much wealth in magical crystals that mundane coins do seem kind of meaningless. Nathan came to the conclusion that the magical grenades were too unstable for use and drained them entirely, tossing the metal shells aside with a frustrated huff and funneling the mana into his skin-strengthening efforts. It's been a while since there was an enchantment where the best solution was just destroying it. But I think a super paranoid archmage willing to blow herself up rather than have her own weapons turned against her is a bit of an exception. I bet she had a skill to not get killed by her own arsenal. The dimensional bags were similarly tricky. They were enchanted to only open to Kala's magical signature, and would seal themselves and break the enchantment if tampered with at all. The whole thing was so well integrated that Nathan just decided to pop the dimensional enchantments rather than risk losing whatever was inside. The heirs had storage space to spare, and wanted what was in the bags more than the bags themselves. That decision was rewarded by veritable mountains of valuable materials and magical items. Every time Nathan broke open a new bag and found a new pile of magical items, he sighed, since it required even more work from him to clear each item. Magical intuition 8 achieved. It took a couple of hours to finish going through the loot. Finally, Nathan stood, massaging imaginary pains and dusting off his hands. He looked up at the glorious night sky overhead as Sarah finished shoveling the last bag's mundane contents into her own dimensional storage spaces. It appeared Kala's guilty pleasure was soap, as the woman had kept a veritable cornucopia of fine scented soaps scattered across a few of her bags. "Well, that's enough wealth to buy your parents' house," Sarah commented, waving her hand towards Stella. The mage flashed a smile as she fished out a magical crystal that they'd found about an hour ago. It was a cloudy chunk of off-blue, and faint tendrils of electricity played through the material. "Ah, but this wealth can fight for me in a way a house cannot." She held the crystal up, and the interior bolts intensified as she channeled magic into it. "Lightning citrine. What a beautiful stone. Might want to put that away. It probably smells delicious to that fire elemental. The light's also pretty obvious," Nathan commented, ambling towards his bedroll. "I'm going to bed. Who's taking over watch?" "If we're going to survive the next nail, we'll want to watch in pairs," Sarah said through a yawn, looking around as she headed for her own bed. "Except for Nathan. You've got the skills to stare that ghoul in the eye by yourself." She prodded her brother awake. Arl swatted back at her before shaking Kachi awake, yawning mightily. Both of them had gone back to sleep after the second dimensional bag, and now they were ready to take over the last watch. Stella yawned in response to Arl, and soon all of them were yawning in a circle. The rest of the heirs went to bed. If any of them shot significant looks Nathan's way, he didn't see it. He lay in bed, thinking of his class choice. "Honestly, my gut is telling me to take Magekiller because the persuasion skill from Master Assassin of Gemor will freak out Stella, and that path takes me farther from the heirs. I'll also need to be careful about anybody figuring out I have it. I think the heirs will understand and maybe even get over it, but it'll still change my relationship with them in ways I don't want." He rolled over, trying to move past his initial reaction and go over other reasons to pick one class over the other. Sarah was right. Master Assassin is better for infiltrating Giant's Rest, but Magekiller will be better for the battle over Halsmith. I think that's kind of a wash, since I'll also want to be better at killing powerful mages in Giant's Rest, and stealth might be important to ambushing the army that's coming. What about what Kachi said? Kia told me to keep in mind the consequences of my actions and watch the direction my path is taking me. What are the paths of these different classes? Nathan tried to leave the question aside and go to sleep. He was tempted to meditate and try to ignore the choice, but decided to face it head-on instead. At first glance, Magekiller looks like it follows a bloodier path. It's got killer in the name. But I don't think that's true. Magekiller is about stalking and killing powerful mages and slipping around their magic to do it. Meanwhile, Master Assassin of Gemor is about manipulation and subterfuge. That's the class you take to knife people in their beds, to gain their trust and then kill them when they're least expecting it. I worry it would lead me towards seeing people as easily manipulable pieces on the game board. A chill went down his spine at the thought. That kind of behavior seemed reminiscent of how both Brox and Phaline acted. They didn't really respect the decisions of the people around them. Magekiller is closer to my path for implacable anti-mage, though it's not a direct combat class. I don't think that's a problem. If the paths become too similar, then maybe they'll merge or something. But right now, my classes becoming more similar means I'll be double-dipping on experience when fighting mages, instead of having to do different things to rank up different classes. He pursed his lips, considering. There was also the part of Magekiller that would let him use his anti-magic to subvert enemy spells. So far, Nathan had never gone wrong with boosting his anti-magic. Being able to exert control over enemy magic seemed very promising. Thinking about endings, that skill alone points me towards Magekiller. I can disrupt magic, but if it's too big for me, like the fire elemental, then there's not much I can do. Maybe being able to subvert it is the answer. My guiding principle so far has been anti-magic, and I think I should keep following that idea. With his mind mostly made up, Nathan drifted off to sleep. If he felt the same way in the morning, he'd choose Magekiller for sure. I need to develop airwalking during the next fight. Hopefully, it'll synergize with the 243 development of Implacable Anti-Mage. Only 6 levels away now. The harsh rays of the sun woke Nathan up early the next morning, coming straight down into his eyes. He squirmed a bit, holding up a hand to block the sudden assault. Then he heard food sizzling and rolled fully upright, rubbing his eyes and looking around their campsite. Arl was cooking over the fire, his unenchanted cookware making more noise than usual. At least the food smelled good. It smelled like Arl was frying up cubed Nindine steak from yesterday and planning to add it to a spiced porridge that was bubbling nearby. Nathan got up to do his business, examining the pass yet again in the sunlight. The destruction from the fire elemental was stark, the bullseye pattern obvious. The fortress of the face looked less threatening now that the flames from its eyes no longer illuminated the entire valley. That was a relative assessment. The flames still roiled in giant pillars, and the knowledge of what lurked inside that ancient dungeon didn't make Nathan any happier with the idea of getting anywhere near the place. Nathan returned to the campsite, taking a plate of boiled grain, well seasoned and heavy with deliciously magical meat. He dug in, eating quickly before the biting wind could steal the warmth from the dish. A theatrical yawn sounded to the side as Brox emerged from his tent, looking freshly showered and ready to go about his day. He looked surprised when Arl offered him a plate but took it anyway, eating happily. Suddenly, the quester frowned at the ground, setting aside the plate and reaching down to pick up a Giant's Rest coin partially buried in the soil. Where did this come from? I would swear by Ada's you didn't loot any of the mages yesterday before the fire elemental scorched them to ash. He looked up at the sky, as if looking for something above them that could have dropped it. Sarah spoke with a full mouth, her voice smug. An archmage of the nails tried to sneak into camp last night while we were all asleep. The quester's eyebrows shot up. The assassins of Giant's Rest. He looked around as if to make sure all of the heirs were present. An archmage. Nathan was on watch. The first thing we heard was him landing on top of her, Arl said, scraping out the last of the pot before handing it to his sister to wash. He walked forward, plucking the coin out of Brox's hands. Looted her too, though it seems we missed some. He tucked the coin into his pouch. The quester didn't offer any resistance, utterly shocked. I didn't even. Then he started laughing uproariously. He doubled over and slapped his thighs, struggling to get words out past the laughter. "You killed an assassin archmage," he guffawed. "By Algoa, she got counter-assassinated." The heirs looked around at each other while the quester kept laughing. He kept getting himself under control before bursting out into deep guffaws once more. After a minute, Brock straightened up, regarding them with a wide smile. "Well, after that trial of the divine, I don't see any cause for hesitation." He speared a hand towards the dungeon. "Let's conquer the dungeon." Nathan rolled his eyes and set aside his own empty plate. "No." The quester turned to face him, his humor quickly fading into mockery. "No, you defeat an archmage attacking from stealth but don't have the teats to challenge a magical dungeon. Aren't you an anti-mage?" "There's no reason to do it," Nathan replied. "If anything, it serves as a barrier against Giant's Rest. An army tries to pass through here, we just cast some magic and summon the elemental. Besides, any loot inside is long melted. This isn't really about the dungeon. This is about Brox being bored and asserting his control." The quester looked around at the rest of the heirs. "Do none of you wish to challenge a fragment of Quenfi, to learn of the deep insights of fire?" He cocked his head towards Stella expectantly. She bit her lip and took a step back as if compelled by the pressure of the quester's gaze. Then her jaw firmed and she met his eyes, giving a small shake of her head. "Bah, I find cowards where I search for the battle blessed." The quester flicked his hand dismissively. Kachai growled slightly at that comment, and the blessing inside them all except Nathan seemed to wake itself, flaring warningly. Brox heaved a heavy sigh. A shard of a dead divine. One who would weep to see his power used so. He turned back to Nathan. "We challenge that dungeon, or else you fight Giant's Rest without me. I could choose Master Assassin of Gemor for the persuasion skill, then use that to persuade him to stay." Nathan studied Brox for a second, judging his words. "He's bluffing. He wants to push us, not abandon us. Alertness 2 achieved." "No." Brox's face twisted with contempt. "Fine. Enjoy dying to Badud." With a puff of dust, he was gone. Chapter 30. 2 levels of tension. Nathan stared at the place Brox had been standing until a moment ago. "Shit. He's coming back," Arl said, pointing at the fancy camouflage tent. "Or else we're taking that. It's enchanted like a Kali's artifact." The corner of his mouth twitched up. "It's almost a good trade." As if reacting to his words, the tent folded in on itself and compacted down to a point that vanished with a tiny pop of displaced air. They all stared at the empty spot of dirt for a second. Then the swearing started. Arl winced, hissing between his teeth. "Muckgrabber's asshole. Harpy tits," Sarah cursed a moment later, throwing down the wood she'd been whittling. "Waking giants," Kachai said, rubbing at his forehead in exasperation. Stella seemed to have mixed feelings, and she just sighed. Sarah's gaze went calculating, and she looked over at the face carved into the far side of the pass. "Should we go challenge the dungeon?" "Think that will bring him back?" "Nope," Nathan said. "He'll come back or he won't. It was a stupid idea before, and it's still stupid. We capitulate on this once, and then he'll know he can win every argument." Arl gestured toward Nathan, frustrated. "It would be better than having him leave. Part of our job was to keep him placated and out of trouble. Now Gemor faces a quester without one of our own. It would have been better to risk the dungeon." Nathan threw up his arms in frustration. "Maybe so, but he was a dick, and I'm not actually sad to see him gone. We kept him occupied for a few days, maybe now it's somebody else's turn. There's a good chance he just shows up in Halsmit and somebody else needs to take over Brock's sitting." "I'm surprisingly free of regret," Stella spoke up, voice light. "He's a blight. As much as I want to learn of the true nature of fire, that elemental scares me. I could feel its hunger, its greed for my magic. It's powerful. More raw mana than any magic we've faced before." Kachai grimaced. "We must inform Sudriel. She will need warning if he returns to Halsmit, and time to prepare an alternate plan if he does not." "Yeah, just throw Nathan at the army and tell him to kill the quester," Sarah said bitingly. "It's his deed now that he drove the quester away." She bit off her next words, then sighed. She reached down to grab the carving she'd thrown into the dirt. Sorry, but this battle is truly a prophecy of endings. Our parents are the obvious choice to fight the Quester, a mage beyond endings. Nobody had an answer for that, and they drifted apart to separate tasks with different levels of frustration. Both Arl and Sarah occasionally sent venomous looks Nathan's way, and Katja's gaze wasn't exactly friendly. The wolfman knelt on the ground, praying over his hammer. Arl pulled out his unenchanted weapons and a bottle of oil, while Sarah resumed whittling the mage figurine. She'd gotten quite good at carving a small figurine of everything she'd killed, from stalkers to mages and even a siege boar. Everybody kept their attention on Stella as she sent a message back to Housemate to deliver the news. Judging from the petite mage's body language, it didn't seem like the response was positive. She flinched a few times, cast a few looks at the sight of Brox's abandoned tent, then laughed briefly before nodding with resignation. She stood up, brushing dust off her knees. "Real's not happy. She told me to be sorry that we've caused smoke and blood." She shrugged, not looking particularly regretful. She was pleased to hear about Kala Dha Drex, but a quester's worth more than an archmage. Stella continued. "We're to remain petrified in place. Our mission is still to guard the pass. My guess is that they want Brox to be able to return to Housemate without finding us there." Kachai's brows furrowed into a grim horizontal line. "Surely we must return before the battle. We must be able to contribute to the fight." "True aim," Stella said in response. "But they'll wait to call us until Phelan signals that the army has left Giant's Rest." "No blood from our wounds," Sarah agreed, gesturing down the pass with a knife. "We can watch this place for a few days." She seemed to have uncoiled slightly, not as tense as she'd been just a few minutes ago. "Not many targets for us to hit in Housemate anyway." "Blood from my wounds," Arl huffed. "I'd prefer to be in Housemate." His sister rolled her eyes and threw a pebble at him. "Hear me, but you're hornier than a sailor of Litcliffe." Nathan silently agreed with Arl. He could be working on teaching antimages in Housemate. He'd moved on from thinking about the exact insights he wanted to teach, and on to the kind of ethos he wanted to inspire. How do I want to train them? What kind of students do I want, and how do I prepare them for being an antimage? Nathan sighed, breaking off his thought process. "All right, so we're staying here for a little while. Might as well get comfortable." Sarah clicked her tongue. "We should move camp. Don't want to stay in the same place too long. Somebody will need to go hunt for food. I'm the most suited. Kachai, come with me. It'll be a good distraction from this Quester muck." The big wolfman nodded, getting up and dusting off his knees. Arl's voice was surly as he stowed his weapons, moving to start packing up the camp. "I suggest Nathan cleans dishes for the next few days." "Hey," he protested, but nobody seemed sympathetic. "Honestly, that's a pretty light punishment for pissing off our ace in the hole badly enough he just up and left. And I've got a bit of a backlog for not washing dishes until now to avoid breaking the enchantments. But the enchanted pots were so much easier to clean." Nathan sighed, scrubbing his hand through his hair as he moved to help clean out the cookware, thinking over the confrontation and Brox's departure. "I was standing up for myself, for us. I'm confident that I was right, that the dungeon was too large a risk without sufficient payoff. I thought Brox would respect me for standing up to him, and I think he did, but only up to a point. Then he just found it annoying because it was something he actually wanted to do." Nathan internally shrugged as he scrubbed away with water that Stella doled out of a dimensional water skin. "Just hammers home that you gotta treat Questers carefully. I treated him like I'd treat a powerful adventurer, but he refused to accept that I wouldn't automatically follow his orders because he was a Quester. I wonder if that's a Quester thing or a Brox thing." "Oh, I just got a message from my mom," Stella exclaimed. She chuckled lightly. "She told me that she's relieved and that we shouldn't blame ourselves." Stella sucked in a breath. and that they wish they'd refused Brox when he took them to that dungeon years ago. Arl grunted from nearby. Yeah, maybe. I wonder what Dad will say. Stella looked across at the threatening dungeon on the far side of the pass. Our nemesis is the endings. We can't have a quester fight that battle for us. You heard Brox, they know more than anybody. They've lived through the endings. The copper-skinned fighter just nodded, going to pick up the tripwires around the camp that had been entirely useless against a flying enemy. Nathan shook his head, returning his attention to the skillet Arl had used to fry up the cubed steak. Well, I didn't pick Master Assassin of Gemor when it might have been useful to persuade Brox. I guess that means I better pick Mage Killer. That's sunk cost thinking, but I'm convinced that the ability to subvert enemy magic is really the prize here. As Nathan scrubbed out his dishes, he made the class selection. Congratulations, you are now a Mage Killer. 2 of your existing class skills have developed, and you have unlocked 3 new class skills. Class skill Regenerative Focus. Your focus will rapidly regenerate when you are undistracted. It can be spent to enhance your attention and improve your control, or on other skills or talents that utilize focus. Class skill Catastrophic Blows. You will be better able to identify the weak points of your foes, and your strikes against those areas are more likely to inflict lethal damage. Injuries inflicted with your bare hands will resist healing magic. Class skill Stealthy Movement has become Battle Stealth. Your movements will be harder to notice, especially in the confusion of combat. This effect can be enhanced by spending focus. Class skill Infiltration has become Mage Infiltration. You will be able to blend into hostile environments easily, and will not seem out of place even in imperfect disguises. This skill will mimic signs of being a mage when you are disguised as one, including a fake mana pool. Class skill Forgettable. Foes will forget details about you after you leave their attention. This is a mental effect that can be resisted by someone with the appropriate skill or sufficient willpower. Class skill Unsuspecting Strike. Your strikes against unaware targets will more easily bypass armor and other protections. New class skill Anti-Magic Stealth. Your anti-magic hides you from magical sensors and detection, and even spells tuned to detect an absence will not detect you. New class skill Spell Redirection. You can use your anti-magic to redirect spells. Will not enhance your ability to otherwise modify spells. New class skill Lethal Index. You will be able to assess if injuries you cause are lethal and how long your foes will survive them. Mage Killer is now level 89. Well, there we go. Not as impressive as Implacable Anti-Mage, but it's not really a combat class. There's a lot of stealth benefits in there. Nathan pursed his lips in consideration as he moved onto the utensils. The biggest thing he'd gained from this development was better anti-magic, which could now be used to redirect spells. What did that even mean? He'd have to practice with Stella to find out the capabilities of spell redirection. Additionally, it enhanced his stealth against magical sensors with Anti-Magic Stealth. He'd already been good against detection spells, though magical traps would still trigger if he got too close. Maybe that wouldn't be true anymore. He also liked that he was already gaining counters for spells specifically tuned to find him. It was only a matter of time until somebody built a spell to detect the void left by his anti-magic. Finally, Lethal Index seemed fairly pointless for him. He wasn't in the habit of leaving his enemies with survivable injuries regardless. Part of the class description indicated it would help finish off difficult-to-kill enemies, but Nathan had been expecting some kind of death blow skill, not a diagnosis one. Sometimes you whiff on a skill. They can't all be bangers. I bet it's because I've had this class for so little time. There was no time for insights for better skills. And maybe it'll be more useful than I'm initially assuming to know if somebody is getting back up or not. The 2 skills that had upgraded were a bit more exciting. Mage Infiltration. specialized him more towards sneaking into a place with a lot of mages, which would be handy for sneaking around Giant's Rest. And Battle Stealth did reflect how he'd been using the skill, trying to make it hard for people to keep track of him in the middle of a fight. Now it's an established strategy. I could already hide from spells, and this skill will help me hide from eyes in the confusion of a fight. He shrugged internally and got back to washing dishes. He wasn't over the moon with his new class, but he was happy. It wasn't revolutionary, but it offered important new capabilities that would help him going forward. 13 more skills than I'd have if I hadn't gotten a second class if you include the utility skills. I'll call that a win. A few hours later, Nathan was bored. Koch and Sarah had returned with some more game, and they'd moved their camp higher up the slope and farther east, towards Giant's Rest. Nathan had explained his new class and the heirs had been appropriately interested, but none of them had been blown away either. Spell redirection had been the only skill to raise eyebrows. Stella agreed to do some practice, and they spent some time exploring his new skill. It seemed to give Nathan's anti-magic a new intangible authority, an ability to control magic as he absorbed it. He could reach out and grab a spell with his aura, then throw it in a new direction with a flick. It didn't work very well, since he tended to mostly absorb anything he redirected that way. It was also much harder to pull off with more powerful and complex spells. Nathan could return a fireball back to sender at 1/3 its original strength, but he wouldn't be able to do the same with a disintegrate until Mage Killer leveled up quite a bit to improve the skill. After a little while, Stella's attention seemed to waver. Her spells were fine, but she didn't seem excited about further experimentation or even learning about more science. "Do you want to keep going? It's fine if you want to be done for today," Nathan said, watching her with concern. Stella rolled her neck around, closing both eyes. "Yeah, I feel like a torch burnt near to an ember. Hear me, I'm glad we saw our parents in Housemate, but I haven't had time to think since the Fortress Foundry." Nathan resisted the urge to pat his friend on top of the head. "Yeah, Housemate was a lot. It might be a good idea to talk about everything. It doesn't need to be now. We've got a few days out here on our own." "No, maybe later." The short mage turned away with a yawn, walking a short distance before sitting down and looking out over the beautiful mountain landscape. Nathan glanced over the other heirs and considered walking over and chatting with them. Unfortunately, recent events seemed to have dampened everybody's mood, and nobody was feeling particularly talkative. I considered myself an introvert back on Earth. What changed? That evening Nathan told some more stories from Earth, just to keep people entertained. He tried explaining the plot of Mass Effect, but the heirs kept getting hung up on his descriptions of space and planets. They understood the concept of ancient death robots just fine, though. The next morning, Nathan looked around. Everybody still seemed subdued, and he was still getting a bit of a cold shoulder, though it wasn't overtly hostile. They watched the pass. Nothing moved except for wildlife, as well as clouds and the streamers of flame from the stone face across the way. It reminded Nathan of the carefree time they'd spent together in the town of Bridgeguard, back when they'd first left Gemor. It had been a break from the politics of Gemor, a time to train and relax and enjoy each other's company. Back then he'd wondered if he would ever look back on that time with longing. And he did, but not because what was happening now was worse. Sure, the food and lodgings weren't quite as ideal, but they were fine. The heirs had time to rest and recuperate, and it was nice. But a tension hung in the air, a knowledge that battle was only days away. A battle that would see a lot of death, one way or another. They had risked their lives before, but it felt different. Previously, they'd mostly fought in situations where they knew they stood a chance at success. This battle that wasn't so certain. There were hundreds of mages of Giant's Rest and Equester on the other side of the field. Even if they survived, the heirs were likely to lose someone they knew, maybe somebody they loved. It was hard not to brood over it. After a few hours, Nathan couldn't stand it anymore. He turned to his teammates. "Does anybody have some paper or anything I can write on?" Stella cocked an eyebrow at him. "I got some paper from Housemate for working through spells. Giant's Rest makes it so there's no more once I run out. What do you need it for?" He smiled. "Writing down the insight of regeneration." Koch turned with an aggrieved expression. "Insights are not written down." "You said you couldn't teach that months ago." Nathan shrugged. "I did say that, but that was then and this is now. I've got to try since my anti-magic talent is pretty useless without a self-healing talent. I also understand insights better than I used to. People don't need to know every detail for a low-tier version of the talent. I'm also hoping that it will be easier since my teaching skill is high-tier now." "You have a teaching skill," Arl said, looking at Nathan in bewilderment. "Yes," Sarah said, eyeing her brother with even greater confusion. "Have you listened to anything he said to Stella? Has he never explained anything to you?" Arl scrunched up his nose, thinking back. "Yeah, he did. It was easy to learn." He nodded towards Nathan. "No wonder Stella's magic is flaring like it's been fed dragon shit. I never listen when you talk about that stuff." Stella rolled her eyes and sighed heavily, reaching into one of her innumerable dimensional pockets and pulling out a thin sheaf of papers along with a quill and inkwell. "Here, that's what I have. I hope it's enough to kill the problem." Nathan frowned at his writing utensils. He'd have to write small and take care so that the words didn't get smudged, but it was something. "Thanks." Koch walked over and sat down next to Nathan. "You have explained some of your healing insight to me. I wish to know more if you would teach me." "Sure." He considered the paper for a little while and how best to communicate the essence of his healing talent. Part of what had stopped him before was not knowing where to start. Would he have to go into chemistry, teach how proteins worked? How much detail was required for regeneration? That also leads to a bunch of really dangerous insights I'm not sure I want to spread. Since he'd first considered the issue, he'd had a lot more experience with Davrar and how insights worked. A lot of the reason he'd originally gotten regeneration at mid-tier was because of the depth of his insight. It was a powerful talent, and the requirements reflected that. It might be true that people trying to learn regeneration would always need to be hurt to try to heal something that would otherwise be permanent. But they wouldn't need to know all of the things he knew. The core insight of the regeneration talent is that the body is capable of healing from any wound, because all of the information needed to grow the body from scratch is still present in even a tiny piece of flesh, Nathan said, falling into lecturing. But once the body is grown, it doesn't know how to regrow it, or have the energy to do it quickly. It's not supposed to happen, but it's not impossible either. He pursed his lips, considering how to translate the lecture he was giving Koch into words on a page. The solution to both of these problems is stamina. It interfaces well with physical processes of the body. If channeled appropriately, it can guide the healing process and provide the necessary energy. From there, it's important to understand how the healing process works. The body is composed of tiny parts called cells, and each of them contains the entire body plan as well as high-tier lecturing 6 achieved.